And for our final presenter before our open forum, she finished her bachelor's in secondary education major in English, her Master of Arts in English language teaching, and Doctor of Philosophy in Education degree from the University of San Carlos. She is currently an associate professor at Cebu Technological University and the University Director for Communication and Media. She was the former University Director for Curriculum Planning and Development. She was the former head of the language section of the Department of Languages and Literature in the academic years 2008 to 2010, and the chair of the Department of Teacher Education from 2014 to 2016 of the University of San Carlos, where she served for 22 years. She is one of the pioneer MTB MLE trainers and PEAC senior high school trainers in the country. Let's give a round of applause for Dr. Christy Ann Haka.
Thank you for that very kind introduction. So I have to maximize the time. According to research, man's attention span has remarkably decreased from 15 seconds now to 8.25 seconds. So, of course, I would like you to tap kablita ang imong tupad, no? Og ingna mamainit na ta. All right, so it is my privilege to share with you a presentation which is very close to me because I would always remember my mother nga mamainit gyud matag buntag. All right, so a prominent cultural characteristic among Filipinos is being food or meal-oriented. Do you agree? Kapila man mumukaon sa usa ka adlaw, no? Kung kamo nag-ihap. Okay. Through food, of course, we gather and share stories that transcend through time, just as our, next slide please, Cebuano food culture. Nga katulog ta mukaon sa usa ka adlaw, pamahaw, paniudto, ug panihapon. However, due to our diverse cultural, socio-cultural, educational, and even economic backgrounds, we have established a culture nga gitawag og painit. Unsa maning painit? No? Of course, no? In Spanish, it is merienda. And of course, no? In English, it is snacks. It's a light meal. Pero karon ang painit, sa mga batanon, dili naman gyud painit. Kay Starbucks naman inyong painit. No? Bose, mga coffee bean, og Don Macchiatos, og wala pa'y budget. No? So ato ang tanawon, asa man igagikan ang word nga painit? O nganong nagpainit man ang mga katiguangan. So hopefully you will be able to enjoy. But my presentation is not research, partly research, but this is actually an instructional material. Proceed to the next slide, please. So this is actually the context of this particular presentation. My intention is to preserve the culture of painit in the lens of Puto ug Sikwate as observed and experienced by the first-year Bachelor of Secondary Education major in English students of a state university in Cebu City. This is in relation to, as a language teacher and their teacher Introduction to Linguistics, we had this word formation as a topic in morphology in our Introduction to Linguistics class. So we looked into the word formation process focusing on affixation. Okay? Unya, we translate that, of course, to the culture and their personal experience of painit. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, again, as mentioned, the intention of this presentation is to make the instructional material on word formation, particularly affixation. So this is actually the outline of the presentation. I'll start with the learning outcomes, introduction, preparation, presentation, practice, performance. This is the 4-piece framework that I'm using. And then we have the students' outputs presented later on, then the references. Next slide, please. Asa man mo ganahan mukaon sa inyuhang puto, tapul o puti? Na? So tanan mo tanaw sa screen. Unsa may lami nga puto, puti or tapul? Puti or tapul? Okay. Okay. So it depends, na? So the learning outcomes for this module is to explain how words are formed, describe the nature of word formation, identify the process of word formation, then transcribe the recorded conversations in the painitan using Gail Jefferson's in Flower Dough's transcript notation, and categorize the discovered themes associated with the eating of Puto and Sikwate. Okay, so you imagine the smell of chocolate in Sikwate. Okay? So nagsuwat good sila unsa kay ilang gisuwat, no? Okay. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so of course, the context here is reflected in the introduction. So word formation, as we know, is the process of forming words by adding an affix. It can be a prefix, infix, or suffix by converting a word into another part of speech or by combining words together to form a new word. So I hope makarelate ang mga linguistics. Na? So the context embedded in this lesson, word formation, is the food culture in Cebu, nga gitawag og painit. Again, highlighting on Puto and Sikwate, as this is the best way to experience a culture through its food. So this can be a rich educational experience among the millennials and Gen Z to develop appreciation for being a meal-oriented people. Okay, next slide, please. So for the preparation part, students did an environmental scanning as they observed the place or places where people go and take their painit, particularly those who chose to order the puto and sikwate. So our activity is entitled, Let's Go, Mangadto ta. Okay? So they did environmental scanning and, of course, provide documentation on the location. So what do they do? Of course, these were the instructions. Number one, observe a place nga painitan, where people take their painit. Two, focus on those who are eating, ordering the puto and sikwate. Then they listen and record the conversations by and among the people who are taking their painit, and then they will analyze the conversations. I brought with me my students' papers. I'll be reading some of them later on, naara siya dinhi, no? So that you would know how they were able to embed word formation in the painit and the culture in it. Next slide, please. Okay, so for the presentation of the learning task, earlier we have let's go. Now we have let's discuss. So the presentation here is actually the part where the teacher starts to present about word formation and embeds the inclusion of language, no, in identifying a particular culture. And of course, because Christmas is approaching, akong napili ang context sa painitan or painit because of the fact that I think most of the students have not experienced it na before. Siguro sa ilang mama o papa, pero sa ilang kagulingon nawala na. So I let them experience that. And as they go there and we discuss, we were able to answer these 3 questions. Where do words come from? Diin manigikan, okay? And from their environmental scanning, observation, and experience, what words or new words were discovered? Later on, you will realize that from the word painit, there were other 26 words that were formed. And what are their associations with these words? Next slide, please. Okay, so of course, because it's presentation, the one on my left, which is on your right, is the word cloud. So there were 26 words which were formed from the word init or painit. Okay, so this is exactly where the affixation is affiliated now with this particular topic. And we, of course, know for a fact that Cebuano words are actually morphologically diverse, which embeds also affixation in identifying tense and quality of the verbs. Okay, it says here that affixation is a morphological process whereby a bound morpheme and affix is attached to a morphological base. So kung atong tan-awon from painit, painit, niinit, na mainit, init-init, na what else? Giinit, no? Nagpainit, mupainit, mamainit, no? Asa man taan na. Or nagpainit. So, of course, it will also depend on how you will pronounce it. If you say, nagpainit, lain na pod na. Or nagpainit, gipainit, mamainit, mumainit. Okay. So maybe perhaps if we can have an activity, I can give you 1 second and write the word that you can actually think of associating with the word painit. Okay, so this is how I did it in my class. And we were surprised that there were 26 words that were formed out of this particular activity. Go to the next slide. Okay, so with that, now we were able to identify the importance of language also in teaching language and also in incorporating culture in it. So language will serve as greatly while discussing food because it facilitates communication and information acquisition. So these are vital to humans and facilitate day-to-day existence. When you ask how, First, language is established as a part of our social identity in terms of a culturally specific vocabulary. So the one that was mentioned in the previous slide. Context-sensitive themes and shared attitudes. But more significantly, they embody the notions of socialization and identity building. Through eating patterns, each given human group can demonstrate its diversity, hierarchy, and structure while simultaneously highlighting both its own oneness and the otherness of those who eat in different ways. Second, next slide, please. So in the next part, we have here performance from let's go, okay, and then let's do it. Now let's share it. Instruction students will share their Painit food culture experience in class, okay? So it says that language and food culture are intricately intertwined and emotionally connected within each person. As students share their observations and experiences, they also get to realize and reflect on our food culture and the way that food is integrated into our language, tradition, community, and heritage, and connects us with our food system. So in the performance task, students observe how the local Cebuano food is prepared, and they personally try the Puto and Sikwate experience in the painitan as they interviewed and conversed with those who are also taking their painit. Moreover, they continue to do their own research coupled with interview with old local residents, specifically aged 60 above, mga senior citizens, on the history, fable, story behind the food. And lastly, the students would submit their recorded, transcribed, and analyzed conversations from their food culture immersion. Kung naay OJT nga immersion, naasad sila food immersion. Okay? Okay, so from the students' output, you get to see yellow pad paper ni gitalig yun namo pila ka buok no during the recorded and the transcribed conversation. So from the word cloud I presented earlier, atong makita din ha nga amo yung gitali sa klase. This is actually what we did. So just sharing with you some of the directly quoted responses no and narrations. Niingon sila, sayo good nimo na mainit day. Init pa ang Sikwate nang? Lamig yun iparis ang puto sa Sikwate kung init pa. Ali dong mamainit na ta. Okay? So, another one says here, while listening to the conversation, an old man told his wife, kainit ga, nainitan akong dila. Na, okay, the wife scolded her husband ko no and she said, hinay-hinay lang good, kay init jud ang Sikwate. Na, so daghan siguro ning mga meaning, no? As mentioned by Dr. Hopio, depending on how you are going to analyze it, but I am just sharing this. And then they talked a lot, and the wife said, so you get to see the topic of the conversation and where the conversation would go. Niingon ang asawa. Then the wife said, na mainit na bakaha si Dudong no kay dalhan nato sila ani aron mainitan pod ang ilang tiyan no and things like that. So daghan pa kay gimingaw na kog painit no taga buntag ang uban taga imbis og kada. No, even the use of the language, how the Cebuano language evolved no in the narration no and in the description. Pirmi ko mamainit dinhi. Okay, lami kaayo mo painit sayo sa buntag. Okay? So, lami jud kaayo ipares ang Sikwate og Puto. Okay? Na mainit ko dito ila jama. Jama is actually one, kung nakaadto mo sa carbon, kaya ako man yun giadto, nay mga stalls dito nga putuhan. Kani adto wala pa nang bag-o nga carbon, naa sila sa ubos, karon na sila sa third floor. Upat ka buok dito, ang usa ka bandera, no? Usa ka dako bitaw nga planggana, based on my interview, 50 ka kilo. Imagine na, mahurot nila sa usa ka adlaw, usahay tulo. No? So which means to say, 150 kilos. No? Sa Puto, imagine na. No? Depende niya. Musamot pag yung nagkadaghan kay magduong na ang Pasko. So there are so many things that you can discuss with this because you will notice that when they documented this, I asked them, asa man dapit ang painitan? And mostly, makita ang mga painitan, manaay ngalan o wala, dool sa simbahan. Lain na sa nga research. Ngano kaha ang say association, ana, nga mamainit or nganong mo painit. So, daghan pa kaayo dinhi, pero, okay, ako lang ni-insert ang last na lang yun. Ningon siya sa iyang experience based sa iyang narration. As I've heard, the phrase ko no, mamainit sa mi, kay wala mi pamahaw. No? Sa akong gimension ganiha, dili lang siya cultural, nasa siya economic, no? Napod siya mga political, socio-cultural implications. Nganong painit lang, nganong dili siya mamahaw. So this is a very rich actually kanang material and educational experience among the students that we can all kanang write about. All right? So diha lang siguro ko kutob sa next slide. Okay, maoni didto sa putuhan nga this is a 70-year-old retired public school teacher. Imagine na mo kat-kat gud siya dito kay mopalit lang siya puto. And according to her, puto ra gyud akong giariday. Okay, kay ang ilahang puto kada order nako init gyud. And imagine pa di mga lalaki aron mo makahibalo. Kay balo ba mo nga ang ilahang tigluto sa puto lalaki? Ngano kahang lalaki? Amo ding init kay lalaki kuno kung ana ilaha sa nang interpretation. Lalaki kay kamo bay mag-ukay sa kuan pila 50 ka kilo. So naagud siya daghan nga meaning nga we have not really seriously looked into. So dinhi So I think with that I'll leave you this hanging because I want you to discover more. Daghang salamat ug maayong hapon.